Hello, and thank you for joining Preservation Dayton and interviewing Chuck Johnson. Former right pad engineer Chuck Johnson has a background filled with history, from living in several historic districts here in Dayton to being part of the many boards across the city, as well as being one of the very few people today who can say they personally worked with Charles Kettering. Chuck has done it all and does not seem to be slowing down anytime soon. You are bound to find this conversation both captivating and informative. Thank you again for listening to his story. Okay, again, we are here with Chuck Johnson. Chuck, thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate it. So I was just going to ask you a few questions. If you could just tell me about your early life and what brought you to here to Dayton.
For Dayton, Ohio, I came here from Yellow Springs. I moved here in 1971, and I was looking for a place that was convenient to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I grew up in Xenia, and that was a little bit longer, but it was very convenient to Wright-Patterson. My job was at Wright-Patterson in Area B, and it was very convenient when I moved to Dayton. I moved into Central Avenue, actually not far from here.
Did you have any challenges working at the base at that time? Even just kind of being an African American man working on the base, and I know, back then there was just a lot of challenges. Did you have anything like that?
Well, of course, when I first went to the base, it was 1963.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a difference. One of the things always, as an engineer, I did a lot of traveling, and there weren't very many minorities in the engineering conferences that I went to, but that changed over a period of time. I never myself had any challenges technically, and I always ended up being in management positions, and there was no difference as far as minorities were concerned.
Well, that's great to hear. So when you moved to Grafton Hill in 1971, did you realize the significance of the area related to the Deeds Barn and Charles Kettering?
Absolutely not. At that time, they didn't have a placard there. So it was just a place I needed a room. They had 2 apartment buildings there then. And it was also convenient for me. So it was a good thing I moved into it. But later on, maybe in about a year or 2, they did put a plaque up about this was the original location of Deeds Barn. And the fact that I had already worked with Kettering in the late 50s, it was 1963 when I first got the job at the base. So in almost 14 years I had actually worked for Kettering. I graduated from Central State College in 1956. 1957 I went to work in Yellow Springs with Kettering and stayed there until 1963.
Yeah, so your apartment building was literally right on the same exact site where the Deeds Barn was, right?
Oh, yes, for sure. Oh, yes. And of course, the Deeds mansion was huge.
Mm-hmm.
It had been torn down in the barn. At that time, the original barn had been moved.
Yeah, I was just doing a little research on the barn before this, and it was moved to Moraine and Kettering, and then there was even some the people had vandalized it and stolen some of the original pieces, and it sounded like it was just a whole mess of trying to get that moved. It was a big disaster.
It's really kind of interesting, as you know, I'm a volunteer at Caroline Park now. I'm in Deeds Barn, and I do get people. Some of the attendees will come through and they will remember living close to the original Deeds Barn. And I just might mention where I am now, it's a replica of the Deeds Barn. When Deeds started the park, he didn't have access to the original barn, and so he built a replica. Very interesting thing, we now have the replica, but later on, Caroline Park got the original. So we have both. We have the original in the building, and we have the replica where I normally volunteer.
Well, that's great that that was able to be saved and rebuilt. Because, like I said, it sounded like it was there was a whole lot of disasters, people stealing pieces of it, and not sure where it was going to go. So I'm glad it's there, it's safe and stable. So you actually worked with Charles Kettering. What was he like? How old were you? And what did you guys work on together?
Oh, I have to say, don't get me started. But yes, when I actually worked with Kettering, I was 23 years old, and I needed a job. I had graduated from Central State College with a bachelor's degree in chemistry. I was going to be a chemist. But when I went to the Kettering Laboratory for a job, they had so many PhDs and postdocs, and they didn't need my bachelor's degree. But what they did have, they had a job open in the engineering department. And having been quite familiar with it, engineering and electrical, I was at one time a ham radio operator. I took that job. And I have to say, it was one of the best things I ever did. Because that job was not just a job. The laboratory in Yellow Springs were, at that time, was to study photosynthesis that Kettering liked. But what was interesting about that, we also worked on all of Kettering's personal projects that he wanted. Those were photosynthesis, cancer research, magnetism, and renewable wind energy. And I worked on all of those projects directly with Kettering. And to say about Kettering, of course, was a multi-millionaire then. He financed the whole project, but he came to the laboratory several times a week. And a lot of times I was working directly with Kettering.
Well, and speaking about the wind science, you have a little piece of history in your garage you showed me the other day. His windmill.
Yes.
You want to talk a little bit about that?
A part of the renewable wind energy that we were doing in 1957, and I'm part of that. And as part of that, he, on his laboratory in Yellow Springs building, still there, he mounted a windmill on top of it with a 32-volt DC generator that ran down into the building, charged the batteries, and we used locomotive lights to discharge the batteries. Then we recorded how much energy we were getting from the wind. Make a long story short, I left there in 63, Kettering died in 1958. Eventually, they took the windmill, they weren't doing that work, and took the windmill down, and a collector in Yellow Springs got the windmill. Later on, the friend of mine said, I think I know where the windmill is. After a couple of years, I found the windmill, and I have to end this story. I have a picture of it, and I actually talked to the collector at the time about the windmill. He was 99 years old, but he died the next week. So I talked to the family, and they gave me the windmill. They didn't give it to me, but I told them I wanted to find a home for it. And so I now have that windmill that I worked on in 1957.
And you're still looking for a home for it, right?
Yes, I am looking for a home for it. I'm glad how things come together, being a board member of PDI, and I'll just explain to you, one of the award was to the Windsor Company. That was one of our PDI awards. The Windsor Company just bought that old laboratory in Yellow Springs. And I've taken a tour of that building a couple of years ago, and I know what's in it. When I took that tour, WYSO was on the first floor, but the next two floors still had a lot of Kettering stuff in it. I talked to the Windsor, I guess, the CEO. He wants to know what to do with that Kettering, and obviously I grabbed onto that. Mm-hmm. So we've got a meeting set up sometime.
Yeah, that would be great to salvage that piece of history and make it to be seen by the public again, even if it's not being used or ran, just to have it be.
They are actually artifacts. They're stuff that actually are historically stuff that Kettering actually worked on. The windmill is really an artifact, though. And I've shown that a couple of places I've showed it. And let me say, I want it there. And here again, this goes back to, strangely, back to Preservation Day. When I did the tour of the Delco, when we did tours last year, that's actually one of the buildings that I've talked to the contractors. That's one of the buildings where I would like to put the windmill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would be a great spot for it.
It'd be completely visible downtown Dayton. It would be a Kettering artifact. Mm-hmm. And the old Plan 2 of Delco. Mm-hmm. How better could it be?
Yeah. So what was Kettering like as a person, and how much did you interact with him, and what are some things maybe you learned from him?
Well, the engineering department at that time was just two people. It was my boss, Bill Treehart, was the chief engineer. I was an assistant to him, and so we did all the stuff that Kettering wanted. And he would call up the stuff or send stuff in, and he would come to the laboratory. I have that one picture. I've got that picture of the magnetic. I've got a picture of Kettering actually taking readings. That's an actual picture of a laboratory he built in South Dayton. And let me tell you just a little picture. You asked me how close we would work on breadboards. In this age now of AI and everything, not many people know what a breadboard is.
Yeah, I know.
But we would really be working on components, soldering those components together. And Kettering would say to me, this is fact. He would say, hold it there, Charlie, while I blow on it. Because it's hot. Yeah. And we would be actually working by ourselves in the building on something that we were putting together that he wanted. That's how close I was. And then I flew in his airplanes, But for those, I knew him from, I think from February of 1956 till he died in November of 58. So I worked on all of his projects.
Yeah, it's amazing that even at his age and how much wealth he had, he was still hands-on in the process of doing all that work and everything. You'd think because he was, 78 when he died?
82.
82. So you'd think he was 80 years old and he's still soldering.
Very sharp, very aware. Mm. And the fact of the matter is, he retired from General Motors in 1947. He died so for those 11 years, he was still quite active all over the country. He's a great speaker, I am now a Kettering historian. I have 15 3-ring binders, all about Kettering. I actually probably have more about Kettering than Kerwin Park does. I've put some of I do a slide, and I have a YouTube channel too, but I carry about 15 slides around now, and my motto is half slides will talk.
Well, that's great. Thank you for that. Moving to the neighborhoods a little bit, and just kind of back to Dayton in general. how did your career at Wright Pat unexpectedly prepare you for your work in historical preservation that you do in Dayton now?
Well, I was an engineer at Wright Pat. I had 2 principal jobs, and that's a story in itself. Because when Kettering died, he died in 1958. I stayed there until 1963, but it just was not the same for me personally. After Kettering died, of course, when Kettering was alive, when he wanted something done, we did it. When Kettering died, the first thing they did was hire a business manager. And of course, then everything you did had to be okayed by the business manager. I can understand him, but that was not what I wanted to do. So I started looking for a job, and I got a job, fortunately, again, at Wright-Patterson Air Force in a brand new laboratory. There were only 5 of us in a brand new laboratory with environmental chambers working for NASA, the space program. That program in 1963 that contract lasted until 1986, 23 years. So 23 years I spent at Wright Pat on that contract. Ending up being in charge of the engineering for the whole project.
So then I have to ask you, I know there's the rumors about the aliens. Are there aliens at Wright Pat? Can you confirm or deny?
It's really interesting. That story is so old. I don't know whether there are or not. There may be. But the next job I was in charge of computer support for about 15 program offices, and I had 4 or 5 people in almost every building. None of my people ever saw any aliens. They saw some pretty weird people, but they weren't aliens.
So what are some of your earliest volunteer work related to history that you did? When did you kind of start doing either tours or just kind of volunteering and spending your time kind of teaching people about history?
I had retired in 2001 from 1971 when I moved to Dayton until all of my career was at Wright. I was still working Wright Pat, but I retired in 2001. And the way I got into touring is about 2004, 2005, there was an article in a newspaper that the junior miss, is that right? Is it junior league? Junior league, yeah. Junior league was starting a program at Riverscape, which had just come there in 2001. They were starting a program called Inventory. The play on the words there, it was going to have tours of all the inventors' sculptures at Riverscape. And so I read that in the paper, loved it. I thought and then they talked about Kettering, and that got my eye, so I went down and joined that program, and was in that program, a charter member of the Inventory program. Did that for maybe 5, 6 years. And then 5 Rivers decided, because of some logistical problems, they didn't want to do that anymore. Oh, I skipped ahead. There's too much. Before that, a friend of mine named Sherry she was at Woodland. She was in charge of the volunteers, and she came and did a talk to the 5 Rivers Inventory people about Woodland. And again, she talked about Kettering, and so I was interested in that. So I went to Woodland, became a tour person at Woodland. I was doing it both Woodland and 5 Rivers, and then 5 Rivers decided they didn't want to do it anymore, and they merged with Caroline Park. And when they merged with Caroline Park, I went with them, and I'm still at Caroline Park.
Yeah, you said you volunteered in the Dean's building?
Yes.
Okay.
Just for my background with catering, I originally did all the buildings in Carolina Park, but now they agreed to let me just do Dean's Barn. So I do Dean's Barn on Tuesdays and some Saturdays, and I've been there since 2011.
So, as far as historic districts go, you have lived in Grafton Hill, St. Anne's, then you moved back to Grafton Hill. And then now you are in Wright Dunbar. You've been in Wright Dunbar for, over 25 years now, right? What was that like when you first moved in compared to now? And just talk to us a little bit about the evolution that you've seen just in that Wright Dunbar area. I know John Gower, another local Dayton historian, refers to what has happened in Wright Dunbar over the past recent years. He calls that a 30-year overnight success, meaning it took 30 years to get to this point, but now just in the past few years, it's really exploded. There's market rate housing going in, there's new restaurants, new businesses all the time. So talk about what it was like when you first moved in, and just kind of how you've seen that neighborhood evolve over the years.
Well, having been there for that long, and it's actually, we bought our house there in 1998, so it's been almost 28 years that we've been there. And obviously, it's quite a bit more. That term of a 30-year success is quite true. Mm-hmm. Although in the very beginning, it was a very active neighborhood. And I have to mention of how the stories, it is actually in some of the information, we at that time were living in Grafton Hill at the Park Lane Apartments. We've been there about 10 years. We were not looking for a house, and we were driving on Evan Moses Boulevard. It was our route to get back to Grafton Hills, and we noticed construction going on, obviously a lot of construction going on. So one day on the way home, we decided to drive in and take a look. So we drove in, looked at the house, lots of infill housing going on. And we stopped at one house and were able to look in the windows. And it happened to be a mirror image. And then we left there, went around the corner, and found that same house being constructed. It was just going under roof, but it wasn't finished yet. We picked up the sheet explaining what it was about. We looked in the windows, and it's interesting. 2 weeks later, we owned the house.
Yeah, so this was part of Rehab-A-Rama. So Rehab-A-Rama, the city of Dayton used to do a lot of those back in the day to kind of take some of these blighted areas and really pour a lot of money into it. And Wright Dunbar is, I think, a very successful showing of what that did for the city. So what was it like when you first moved in? Was it still a little rough in some areas?
It was a little rough. There were houses I can't tell you, there were houses that were still, to be quite honest, drug houses. Mm-hmm. It seems that most of those houses that we knew of now are quite successful. They've been rehabbed, people living in it. And when we moved in, there were probably 9 or 10 families there. I think we're over 70 families now at Wright Dunbar. And of course, we've been there. And we've been there the whole time and where we live. The block we live in, there are about 10 houses there, and I think 8 of them are infill homes. So there are about 2 or 3 original homes that are still there. But, the neighborhood is quite active in the neighbors that we have.
Yeah, we just drove through the neighborhood earlier today, and it was beautiful. It was, all the houses are kept up great. It's a really great neighborhood.
We were lucky when we moved in. We lived right across. From the city park. It's called Okanagan Park, and actually we talked to the city of Dayton at the time, and we we thought living across from the park would be a negative, with different things and late night basketball. I'm a basketball fan, but late night basketball when I'm trying to get some sleep. But that was not the case. It was intended to be a memorial park. It's called Oak and Ivy Park as a memorial to not only Paul Laurence Dunbar, but for the area in general.
Because that was his first book. His first book was called Oak and Ivy. His first book of poetry, right?
Yes. Oak and Ivy was and the reason Oak and Ivy was Paul Laurence Dunbar's actually his first book. But so anyway, it's been a great park here. We have music festivals there, and where our house was very good. We can sit on our porch and watch the music festival. So it's been very positive.
Yeah, and when I went over there the other day, you were showing me all the new landscaping you've done outside, as well as your greenhouse you built in the back, and it really is remarkable what you've done, even with it being an infill house and not technically a historic house. I mean, if you look at it, you wouldn't know it's not 120 years old. It looks old, but the work you've done to the outside, especially, is really great.
Yeah, when we moved in, the house was when we bought it, it was just going under roof, and so we were able to do a lot of our own of what we wanted from the house before it was completed. Working with the contractor. I have to mention one thing. At the beginning, we sponsored with the city something called Discover Right Dunbar 2000. And that was one where we got about 7 or 8 people to show their houses. Our house being one of them, were typically with what's going on now. The other neighborhoods have done that. But in 2000, we had this with lots of people coming through the houses. And one of the families that looked at our house, the Joe Shaw family, they went through our house at that time in 2000, and they actually built their house. They came back and built a house right next. They're our neighbors now, the Joe Shaw family. But that came as a result. And there were 2 or 3 other homes that were a result of Discover Right Dunbar 2000. So when you think about it, we did that back then, Discover 2000, and now we're almost 30 years later. Mm-hmm. And it's really, from that seed, it's been a steady growth. Mm-hmm. Quite accentuated in the last few years, which is a good thing.
Yeah, well, that's great. I know you have big plans for Oak and Ivy Park. You talk about them a lot, what your goals are. Where did that passion come from, and what are some of your plans and hopes for that park to become someday?
Now, of course, we have used the park constantly. Even now, it has a fountain, which is really a good thing. It has a fountain. And even now, I'm a member of the neighborhood association, and I've taken over the actual maintenance of the fountain. But back then, we had volunteers doing the fountain. And in the very beginning, you mentioned John Gower recently. John Gower is still here. I think he's in citywide development. But he and another individual that was part of Preservation Dayton, Paul Woody. Paul Woody had the initial concept of Oak and Ivy Park. And actually, it's never reached it. I am in the process of trying to get it to reach its full potential. All of the information is there now, the fountain is there. But my project is to go back to the original expectations and get it to that point. And what that means to make it call it the Oak and Ivy Cultural Walk. And the park now runs from Germantown Street to West 3rd Street. And it already has a walk with several features, but it's never been completed. And I just expect to have boulders and information all along that walk. So when a person starts at one part of the walk, they hear the whole history. And it's in different history books now, it's in different things. But this walk, when you start, you get the whole history of Wright Dunbar, you get the history of the Wright brothers, and you get the history, and I add this right now, you get the history of the nickel. There is so much history there.
Mm-hmm.
That's my idea.
And so the nickel was is kind of the nickname given to West Fifth Street, and it was predominantly African American businesses and movie theaters. And did you go there very much? Was it still around when you were like?
No, it was gone.
It was gone already.
There wasn't much left at that time. Of course, the Mallory House was still there, but I'll show you the picture. It was boarded up. But no, the nickel was before my time.
Even when you lived in Grafton Hill, it wasn't there. Even in the 70s.
Now, I don't know the whole history of that because when I lived in Grafton Hills, I was still working. I didn't do much going around to different neighborhoods. My only connection with the history then, my wife worked for the Dayton Public Schools. She worked there until she retired in 2013. So we got a lot of contact with different people in Dayton.
Okay. That street is unfortunate. There's really nothing left. Was it the Palace Theater? Was that one of them?
Actually, as it turns out, I don't know the exact date now, but the Palace Theater was still there, and after we moved there, and so was the Classic Theater. I was involved in the Classic Theater, trying to get it saved. And it's saved. I've still got lots of information. I worked with the people trying to do it. They had a really good idea, and it would have been perfect if it was still there and doing it now.
Yeah. Their
idea back then was almost like social media is now. That's what they wanted to do. They wanted to have events there. If you go in and look at the Wright Dunbar, if you look at the Wright Dunbar website, you'll see pictures now, very amazingly, of what happened. Like national figures would appear there, like Count Basie, Ella Fitzgerald. But you know now, when you think about the historical figures like Ella Fitzgerald, can you imagine?
Yeah.
They appear on Fifth Street.
I know Andrew Walsh has a great blog that he does called Dayton Vistas.
Yeah.
And he did a great blog about the whole nickel and everything. I'm looking around, so now I have his book somewhere. Lost Dayton, yeah. It has a great section all about the nickel and everything that was there. But yeah, so it's a shame that's all gone. But
my idea about the cultural walk includes the Palace and the Classical. As you walk along, you see things that recommend pictures and recommend and historical facts of that. So that's my idea. You started one in, and now with the right flyer there, that is amazing. You start there with the right flyer, you walk through, end up and their original concept had stopping points and benches all along it as you stop and see certain history. My idea is to get a commission started, someone who can look at that and develop it.
Yeah, that would be great. It is such a nice area. I mean, it looks great now, but if it could be better and added more information on there just to talk about everything that has been lost, that would be a really cool thing for that area. But currently you serve on a few boards and volunteer with some other organizations. What all are they, and kind of what led you to want to volunteer with them and because you could spend your time doing a lot of different things, but you are spending it volunteering and trying to save history. So Well, what is your passion there?
I guess I guess my real passion is history, and most of it is based on Kendrick. Since I knew him and the things it has recently branched out, living there next to Open Ivy Park, into Paul Lawrence Dunbar. I'm doing a number of things with Paul Lawrence Dunbar. I have a talk now that's based on Paul Lawrence Dunbar at Open Ivy Park, really discussing a lot of the things we've talked about here. When I started my talks on Kettering, I've just talked to dozens of mostly nonprofits or nursing homes, or I've talked at the Engineers Club at one time, twice I've talked there. I've talked at the Mound Research Center. One of the funniest places I talked to, I did a talk with a New Jersey radio club by Zoom. So I did my talk from their monthly meeting. And it's I have so much information now. And I do have a plan. I've talked to them, because that doesn't just include the history of Dayton. It includes all the work I did at Right Path, which, was from 1963 to 2001. I kept all that stuff, majority of it. I have organizational charts, the number of buildings we were in. So, and now I'm with PDI, of course, Preservation Dayton. That organization really gets into a lot of what I like to have done. Getting things redone, rehabbed, and saved. And there is a story. I won't go into the whole thing now. It's another talk I have. But which is interesting when you talk about history and saving stuff. Charles Kettering, when I was working there, he was interested in magnetism. That was one of his things we worked on there. He built a laboratory south of town. I'll make this quick, believe it or not. But he built a laboratory south of town. And to give you an idea of working, when you were working for a millionaire, I think even now we've got, but I can see what that happens. He had 3 airplanes based at South Dayton Airport. When we would start in Yellow Springs, we would go to Springfield, get in one of his airplanes, fly to the Montgomery County Airport, get out and go to this laboratory. So that would be my day's work in the morning, getting up and going to work, getting in the airplanes and then coming back. But let me tell you this one thing about that. When we were doing that, and this is another talk that I'm developing, because Kettering died in 1958. 1964, the Kettering Foundation decided to stop doing the magnetics work. They decided to give it to a college. They gave it to Oakland University in Detroit. And they actually moved the whole laboratory up there. One of the engineers, not engineers, but one of the scientists went with it and became a professor there. I became aware of it, and they ran out of money, and I've even got the emails trying to save it. I tried to raise money, and the sad part of it, they demolished it. Mm-hmm. That's a long story, but when you're talking about history, I was very disappointed in that. I don't want that to happen again. Yeah. With the Kettering building.
Well, that's part of the reason why you're on the Landmarks Commission, right? A lot of these demolition requests and things like that have to come through the Landmarks Commission. Do you want to talk a little bit about landmarks?
The Landmarks Commission was put together. We have, I think it's 13 historic districts, and the landmarks, and they call it landmarks because the historical landmarks, we take a look at what, and we have a complete guideline authorized by the city about what historical, and it's based on the national historic guidelines. And so when people want to do something, they come to us and they get what is called Certificate of Appropriateness, a COA. And we have some legal, we can issue stop orders if people are doing work of a certain amount of the COA. And so I've been on that since 2011, looked at hundreds of cases. And what that does, it keeps the quality of the historical neighborhoods over a period of time. And that is very, very, very important. And we actually get people in who they really want to do things that will not keep up the history of neighborhoods.
It's about you, it's about things you've done in the past, stuff with catering. Is there anything else that you would like to share with us today?
Oh, well, just looking at my career, I mostly talk about catering now and the stuff I'm doing in Dayton, but I am putting some stuff together about my career. My career at Wright-Patterson, the two things I did, one of them was with NASA and with Wright-Pat. I was in the Merrill Med Labs. I was in charge of 8 environmental chambers, and we did all the design modifications. I had 3 engineers working for me. I had about 15 people, and I'm putting something together to show how many buildings that we did, how many buildings we were in doing that design and modification. After leaving that, I became head of I got a contract with the Wright-Patterson Computer Center, and we were in charge of, very good when PC support started. We were in charge of PC support, software design training for about 16 program offices. So I had about 4 or 5 people in maybe each office, and doing in the beginning. And a lot of things I look at that now because we're talking about in the 1970s. Software support was entirely different in the 1970s compared to what we have now. There were links and all the stuff we had going on. Back then, you did it piece by piece by piece. But anyway, so historically, I'm putting all of that together. And I have taught all of the papers I have are going to go to Wright State. Wright State Spatial Collections and Archives at some point in time.
Well, that's great that it'll all be saved and archived and be available for people to look at for generations to come.
I've got, for what I've done in the past 25 years, I've got just as much for the work I did there on both contracts. I have all that information. Interesting, I'm now working, and this is something that's important, I'm working with the Dayton Microcomputer Association. They have a Dayton Microcomputer Museum. I don't know the exact location, but they're recreating all of the early computer stuff. I've got lots and lots and lots of old computers that I'm donating to them that they will get eventually.
Oh, great. Well, one other question I just have to ask you is, how do you do it all? How do you have all this energy? How do you find all this time to do all the things that you do?
Well, can I say my motto?
Yeah.
I tell people, I say so much to do, so little time. So that means you can't slow down. You've got to keep going. And
the body in motion tends to stay in motion, right?
Yes, I don't want to market this. People can do what they want, but I'm a vegan, not the spot kind of vegan. My wife and I love animals, and I have to say this: in this house, at one time there was the cat room. At one time, when little story I tell you, I was still working when we bought the house in 1998. We shot, and at the end of it, there was tear gas, and the end got students closed down Route 68. So I was a part of that.
Oh, that's amazing. That's
And I've got that fully documented because I belonged, many years ago, I belonged to a group called Action, ad hoc committee to integrate optimally now. So you can see I lived in Yellow Springs, I was working, but I was very much involved in community activities there. That same year, and I have to say I'm a graduate of Antioch too. I didn't go through that part of it, but I went with a group of Antioch students, young people. Well, I was younger then. I went with a group of Antioch students. We went to Washington, D.C. for the March on Washington. So I was at the March on Washington.
with Martin Luther King.
Yes. That day, we went there the night before and was there the whole day and came back the next night. So that's another significant thing in my background. And I guess you could call it historically related. But that was probably one of the major events in my life. And I am quite a political person. One other item which I've got this documented too, John Kerry, the John Kerry presidential campaign.
Yeah.
His last campaign of that year, he did a Southern Ohio rally that went from Dayton. It started at Dayton and went all the way to Jackson, Ohio, with campaign stops and speeches along the way. I was a driver in that campaign.
Wow.
And our job, we went after them wherever they were, got down the posters, which they wanted to hold on to. So, and one of the comments at that time, the John Kerry campaign, I was a driver, and one of the campaign is being a little old for this.
And here, that was what, 2000, was it 2003 that he was running?
So.
Yeah, 2004.
And I said it being a little old for
And here we are 22 years later, right? Well, Chuck, I feel like I could have talked to you all day. I really appreciate you sharing everything with us today. You have such an extraordinary life, and I really appreciate you sharing some of the highlights with us today. So, thank you again for coming. Is there any last things you'd like to say? Or
I think I covered at least 10% of it.
yeah, like I said, we could probably make this a whole series just on Chuck. Well, again, thank you guys for joining us, and I hope you learned something, and I hope you join us for some of our other presentations as well. So thank you again, Chuck.
No problem.